Welcome, everyone. And I want to introduce my special guest, Gary Laney. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you, John. A pleasure to be
We're
with
going
you.
to talk. Great. A best-selling author. We'll get into that. But before that, we need to talk about his great career. And so take us back to the time you left school. What was your first major assignment after you left school when you were in youth?
Well, so if you don't mind, I'll explain it two ways. So I grew up in a family that was, my dad was an entrepreneur, he had a series of retail stores. And so I worked through my teenage years doing that. And then I got a job in college, my freshman year, working with a company called Eagle Systems. They did door-to-door selling books and family educational items and things. And so I needed a way to get through school. My dad wanted me to get a different experience. And so I spent the summer, my first summer, as a young guy trying to figure out how to sell door-to-door. I'd had a lot of experience selling in a store. It's a different story to go out and knock on somebody's door and sell them that doesn't know you. No handoff, no warm introduction. So I did that for a summer. I had a great summer. I had 125 salespeople. I was fortunate to be number one. And I was working 12 hours a week, 12 hours a day for 6 days a week, took one day off. I broke the record, I think it was back in 1979, John, so in my mind. But I sold.
You were still with Eagle Systems?
Still, I stayed with Eagle Systems for 6 years. And then got an MBA and then went back to them as a VP of sales. So that was really my first real entrance into corporate America, right?
So you were going door to door for 12 hours a day?
For the first 4 years, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, only in the summertime, but my first summer I made 10 grand back in 1979. That's a lot of money. In 1980, I made about 14. This next year I made 21. The next year I made 28. That's the year I got married. So I didn't have to worry about working when I was going through school. My wife was comfortable and we both just focused on the right things. And yeah.
So have you ever done cold calling on the phone?
Done that as well. I owned a telemarketing company in between a bunch of stuff, and we had like 10 operators and we did nothing but cold call on the phone.
So which is more difficult, knocking on doors or calling on the telephone?
People will give you varying degrees of difficulty, I think, measurement on that. But I think for most people, going door to door is much more difficult. You have to show up physically. You have to knock on the door. If they reject you, you have to walk away with your tail between your legs. Some people just don't like that. I grew up with a mental attitude that every no gets you closer to a yes. Zig Ziglar was one of my great mentors back the day. He probably trained 600 of the salespeople I've managed. And so the phone, you can fake it. You can take a break. You don't have to walk in front of somebody's house. I think it's more easy.
So that was back in the late 70s and early 80s. Do you think there's still an opportunity in 2021 and 2022 and 2023? Do you think there's still an opportunity to go door to door?
Oh, there's thousands of college sales reps that do it every summer. Okay. Thousands. Our company kind of started that whole thing back in 1970, before I joined them, like 75, 76. One of the very first companies, well, Southwestern used to sell Bibles, door to door, and the pot companies, I'm trying to remember all the names. So they kind of started up, but we were one of the first to take college students on a summer basis and help them make enough money to put them through school. And today, there's tens of thousands of students do that. I know a lot of companies, a lot of them started here in Utah. And
Eagle Systems still exist?
Eagle Systems does exist. They don't do summer programs anymore. They have a variety of different companies under that umbrella. Steven Schallenberger, who was one of the people I interviewed for my book, great entrepreneur, he owns that company, and they have a retrofit company in California that does installation and retrofit stuff. He has a lot of different concerns as well as a training company, but I don't think he does door to door anymore.
So what possessed you? You were a salesman. You went and got your MBA?
I did.
And got out of your MBA and you went back to the company. Did you like the business that much, or they made you such a great offer?
Yeah, so I came out of, I've had some regrets whether I went back or not, even though it was a great experience both ways, because I had had 6 good years and I got my MBA. I got a great job in Chicago with a consulting firm as a senior consultant. I was being mentored by the CEO of the company. And the Eagle came back and offered me a VP of sales job, and that's what got me. It was, the title and the opportunity and the chance to go back kind of to where I lived before, where my family was. So if I'd
How
had it
many
all,
people reported to you?
at one point I had 400 and something salespeople underneath me.
And you were under 30 or
I was
about 30?
definitely under 30. Yeah.
Wow, that's an important.
26 years old. 26. Yeah.
Nice. I don't want to leave your dad without asking this question. One of my favorite, in school, I think they don't teach you about the 5 most important things. They don't teach you about God. They don't teach you about being a significant other. They don't teach you about raising children, and they don't teach you about accumulating wealth. And one of my favorite books on accumulating wealth is Rich Dad Poor Dad. So
Sure.
my question to you was, you said your dad was an entrepreneur. Were you fortunate to have a rich dad?
He was not rich. He was not poor. He made a good living and took risks, but he did things that no one in his family had ever done before. I mean, he bought a movie theater when I was tiny. And then TVs were introduced to the market and it crumbled his business. And so now it's weird how it's gone back, right? But he was showing first run movies, every day of the week. And all of a sudden he had to drop it back to twice a week. And then he closed down the business. And my dad was such an honorable guy that he decided he was going to pay back the loan anyway. Went to the bank and said, I'm closing my business, but I'll take whatever time it takes. Please let me pay it off. And I want to keep my good credit. It took him like 10 years to pay that thing off. And in the meantime, started a retail store and it became a small chain of 5 or 6 stores.
Awesome.
So,
so when you left Eagle, what did you do?
So I left for 2 years to get my MBA. And that's when I had the opportunity to take this job in Chicago, but then I got the advanced opportunity to become a VP of sales with him, first opportunity in my life. So I decided to come back, did that for almost 4 years, then went on with my career.
And so what was next? What was your next, after you left the VP of sales at Eagle, where'd you go?
So I had a triple major at Northwestern. That's where I got my MBA at Kellogg. Policy, finance, and marketing. Second degree in marketing. So my first undergrad was the same. But my minor at grad school was MIS, which back then stood for Management Information Systems, which today would be called IT, probably. And so I wanted to get into computers. So I took a job after I spent those 3.5 years with Eagle again as VP of sales with a software company, my first high-tech job, if you will, as a national sales director. And from that position, I went on to have more opportunities, and I moved to the Bay Area. I moved to California and spent the next 20 years almost selling software, running sales teams, became a VP of sales multiple times. One of the companies became public while I was there. So that was a great run. So I kind of jumped into all that stuff and had a good run.
So you were with IT for how many years?
So it was high-tech software, and it was for 17 years, I think, total.
Okay. And you were in California?
Started in SoCal, took over the Western region for this company, became their VP of Western region, and then moved to Northern California for a VP sales job.
Okay. So, and then when you left that, you were an employee in all those years, 17 years?
I was.
And then what happened after that?
I was VP of sales for a company called Upshot at the time, and Upshot was the main competitor of CRM Salesforce. If you heard of Salesforce.com. And I knew Mark Benioff at the time. He tried to recruit me. I decided that though I had 2 sons that were young at the time. I was always gone. I was traveling every day almost, except for weekends. And I just had gotten tired of being away from my family so much. I decided to quit that last job. I took kind of a transitional VP sales job to help a company get acquired by Salesforce. And then I went out on my own. I started buying and selling companies, and that became my forte. It's what I'm still doing today.
So, so you're a merger and acquisition guy?
Well, for me, yeah. So 12 businesses I've bought and sold. One of those I founded. Most of those I bought in a turnaround situation, grew it, built it, and sold it.
So what was your first acquisition or your first company that you went in and you each of the times did you buy them? All dozen times?
All except for one.
Okay, so what were you looking for? What kind of company were you looking for?
Hey, it was interesting at the time because I was building a very expensive house and my wife was concerned. I mean, we were building a $3 million house at the time. And it was an investment. It was never intended to be our long-term. We lived there for 7 years. And I just couldn't, without having, that steady executive income, I had to make sure that we'd be successful. So I researched for about 3 months, traveled East Coast back and forth a few times. I probably evaluated 200 different companies, and I ultimately bought 7 all at once. I mean,
Wow.
within about a month or two, a period of time, because some of them related to each other, and I just felt like I would follow the money. They're fairly inexpensive. I think I paid $10,000 for one. I paid $70,000 for another. They were in turnaround situations where they might just close the shop, but I saw potential. And so one of them was a company called babychangingstations.com. I haven't talked about that in years, but it was a koala brand distributor. They were struggling. They were just trying to, make ends meet. And I took it in 2005, 2004, 2005, for the next 7 years until 2012 or 2013. I forget the exact time frame. And we became the #1 distributor in the world. So we sold, it was probably doing $100,000 in business when I bought it. When I finished, we're doing almost $2 million. So for one of those 7 businesses I bought, that became a great gift, and we worked really hard to make that happen. And so that was one of them.
So the first 7, the most expensive was 70,000. And what was the geography?
What you mean, where my clientele
Yeah,
was?
where were the 7? Were they all in California? Were they all over the country?
So this company called babychangingstations.com was a New York company. I flew to New York, met with the guy that owned it, and I bought it on the spot. And then he transitioned it to me. Another company I bought that had been kind of a forefront blog, one of the first fashion blogs I bought for my wife. It was called shesheme.com, and I became the marketing director. We took that from a little company that had maybe 8 or 10,000 subscribers to almost 50,000 subscribers, and we sold affiliate advertising. In fact, Brian Esposito, who was another person I interviewed for my book, was one of my clients at the time. He owned a company in New York. So that one was actually in North Carolina. So I bought that one in North Carolina. The other ones, I may have not have traveled to buy. I think I just bought over the phone or over email. And I don't think I ever actually traveled there to do it. Since then I have, but not that first round.
It seems difficult. I mean, you were very bold to buy companies that weren't in sight, that you couldn't go visit. And how did you get the management for the 7 companies?
So for example, Shesheme, we bought nothing. The owner transitioned it to us. We had one. So it was a blog, and they had a team of bloggers, and we did hire them. We paid them, by the blog. And then I hired 15 salespeople that were commission only. Some of them were students, to go out and sell advertising and sell, our products. And so that was something I managed remotely. They were all over the place. I had somebody in Atlanta, I had see people in California and Chicago, etc. The other Baby Changing Stations was kind of a family-run operation, even though I did hire I hired a customer service team that took calls, but my family took care of the rest. We did all the shipping, we did all the packaging, and all the warehousing. And so these things were selling for $200 a piece. So if you can imagine, if you sell $200,000 of those in 1 month, how many of those are there? $200 a piece. It's a lot. So I had a background of selling to corporate, so I started getting opportunities with big corporations that want to buy from me. So I know how to handle and navigate through their management and their procurement process. So yeah.
So you had 7 companies. How long did you hold the longest one? What was the longest of the first 7? What was the
was the one I bought for my wife. We kept it until 2019, and we sold off part of it and shut down the rest. She just wanted to keep it all that time, and it was successful. And like I said, we had some great advertisers, including Avenue U that Brian Esposito used to own.
Now I haven't met a lot of entrepreneurs, single entrepreneurs that have bought more than a dozen companies. I'm sure I've met a few, but do you have any criteria, like it has to meet certain standards? It has to be 1, 2. I mean, are there top 3 or top 10 things that a company must have for you to be interested in it?
Well, yeah, first of all, I have to like what they're doing. I have to like the product. So that's important that I have some kind of reason to want to promote it. I think I could sell anything, John, for some certain amount of time, but if you're going to sell it for a while, you better like what it's about. You better believe in the product, believe in the benefits, the value proposition. But I think more than anything, I was looking for something that was right priced, meaning that it had value more than what they were selling it for, meaning there was potential. If you added the right criteria to it, the right marketing, the right attention, and got it into the right market, you could probably do a lot better. And the person usually selling it had a good idea, and they set it up, and they had some traction. They showed that that could be sold, it could be successful. They just didn't know how to manage it.
Would this be an analogy that, you've heard the phrase, we buy ugly houses?
Yes.
Would it be you bought ugly businesses?
Yeah. I like that analogy. That's a good one.
My oldest daughter's bought hundreds. She bought that franchise that the phrase is, we buy ugly houses. And of course, each time they buy it, they have to go in and remodel it, refurbish it, clean it up, and repair it. So that's what you did. You bought businesses that weren't being run well, and then you turned them around.
12 times. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And I bought a few ugly houses too, by the way.
Okay. So you had 7. How did you how many years did it take to get the other 5?
How many years to sell them, or to?
No, you started with 7 businesses.
Yes.
You added 5 more to get to 12. How many? I mean, did you buy them 1 year at a time, or every 2 years? Or
no, I mean, all 7 of those probably within the first 6 months. And I'll tell you why, because I had another business called Stylish Bridal, and it related to my wife's fashion business. So I thought we could use the same clientele to sell more products, right? I had something called E-Business Moms. Back in the time, it was a big blog for women that wanted to get into business. So E-Business for Moms. And so no, I just kept looking for businesses that related, so I didn't want to have 7 different businesses that were completely different. I wanted to have something that crossed over, where there was affinity toward, one business to another, and where clientele might make sense, where we could sell to the same clients over and over.
So cross marketing has never been done well on a major scale. How successful were you on at your level? For example, it sounded like the best so far I've heard is the one with your wife and the business you acquired. Were you able to merge the customer base?
Somewhat. Yeah. I mean, we had moms, we had new, people getting married, and we had this, and then this business for blogging actually was very good. So I think the blogs emerged pretty well together. The other ones, like the baby changing stations, it was about women and babies, but I sold to businesses, so I really didn't deal with moms ever. Right. I mean, we sold to churches, we sold to contractors, to anyone that needed to buy baby changing stations for their facility. I sold when they had the Olympics in China. I sold all the baby changing stations for the airport there. They bought like 300 baby changing stations. Every one of those were mine. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, cross marketing. I thought it was easier mentally for me to buy things that were more alike. and where the clientele might be alike. And so it wasn't so confusing, so complex to me.
What was your favorite out of the 12?
Baby changing stations. Sounds
And
crazy.
that because of the money, or?
Yeah, because, well, and I liked it. It was my ability to get in and sell, on a business level. B2B is my favorite type of thing to sell.
So you kept your wife's until recently. What was the other one that you held on the longest?
So she, me. So those two were the longest. I also had this stylish bridle I kept until 2012, I think. We finally sold that. It had another name called Wedding Dress Discount. So we had several, I got in kind of heavy into e-commerce because it was kind of what I grew up in. My dad was a retail business guy, and I became an online retail business guy for about from 2004 to 2012 heavily, and then less as for the next 5 years.
And then, so you began to sell off your businesses. They're almost gone, and you started a new career. What was your next career?
Well, I just kept buying more businesses, John. So what I wanted to do next though was leverage my contacts, my connections. And so I was looking for some kind of a networking business, and I found this company called Trustegrity, and it was brand new. The owner that started hated it. I found that after I bought it, I read his blogs, and all I could say was bad things about this experience. He says he's a brand management guy. He's really good at constructing new ideas, but he couldn't stand going to meetings. He didn't like dealing with people. So it was right for him to sell it, and I bought it. And so I spent the next 7 years developing that, and about that business, and enjoyed it. Now I'm starting another one of those. So it's been something I've really enjoyed.
So when you said you were looking for networking, what made you look for, what drove you to look for a networking opportunity?
I was looking for anything related to mentoring and business people gathering. I didn't really even think to look for a networking company initially. I finally started looking for it, and that one popped up, and so I jumped on it. I flew to San Diego, where the owner was, and I bought it, while I was there. But I was looking for things where business people could become mentors, they could become coaches to each other, could help each other. And I thought that would be a great business to get into.
Yeah, let's talk about that industry a little bit, because I have to say that, I was CEO of 2 public companies, and I was just clueless about the networking industry. That was one of the biggest mistakes I ever made in my career, is that I would send people to the Chamber of Commerce. And only about 4 years ago did I hear about BNI and the whole networking opportunity.
Really? Wow.
So would you take people through you're familiar with BNI pretty?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right. So tell our listeners about the BNI story, and then what was you were clearly hugely different from them, and there was clear differentiators. But talk about the biggest networking organization in the country by far has over 100,000 members, and to my knowledge, the second largest only has 5,000 or 6,000. Yeah. So BNI is a huge success story. So talk about BNI and their success.
Yeah, so I think Ivan Meisner, was the founder. So BNI was interesting because listen, when you're in college, they talk about networking, but when they talk about networking in college, they're talking about how do you network to get to your next job. They're not really talking about how do you build your business. There's this whole new side to networking about these outsourced, independent business owners that have to find ways to grow their business and not have a huge marketing expense. So when BNI came along and said, anybody can come into our group, join our local group, and we'll show you how to get referrals for your business. We're a referral promotion networking club. And it was very, very popular because, listen, go down to any shopping center, and anyone in that shopping center could belong to a BNI group. That's the great thing about it. So you could be a hairdresser, an auto mechanic, you could be a tax prep, guy in an office from Jackson Hewitt. You could be anyone in that shopping center, and you could join this group. And their whole idea is how to let's get to know each other and become comfortable with each other, so we can refer leads to each other on a weekly basis. So they met on a regular basis, and it really took off. I mean, the reason I liked BNI in a sense, even though I never really created groups like theirs, is that anybody could join, and they measured the success based upon the referrals and what those referrals turned into, which means revenues. And so you're in a group, and you're touting every week. We handed out 100 referrals last month, and it represented, $200,000 worth of sales. Big deal. So, I mean, it became viral in a lot of senses. I mean, because it franchised it, and it sold it all over the world. And you're right, it's still the largest networking business around.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
national or internationally, I think they have
Internationally.
200,000 members. Yeah.
Yeah, they're huge. They're huge. And I've known a few of the stalwarts in that company, some of the regional VPs and others. I've never met Mr. Eisner, but he's still very popular, and he did a great thing.
So you go every week, you mingle with this is pre-COVID, of course. It's changed a bit.
They're still doing it though. I mean, they're still meeting. A lot of it's virtual.
Yeah. They merged, and their job, they understand that there's one realtor, there's one attorney, there's one tax guy, and your job is to refer business to the other people in the group, and they measure them. They're pretty strict about that.
Very report driven, and every person in the group is exclusive to that category that they were signed up to join in. So like you said, you have one attorney that does tax, one attorney that does personal injury, and they have one CPA, so on and on. They might have 20 people in a group. Some groups are larger, but for the most part, they are very exclusive about who can be in the group.
So when you acquired
TrustEgrity, when you acquired them, how many members did they have? It was brand new. I think we had 30 members total. I mean, it was very.
Just
had
one city?
No, we had a group. We had a group in Scottsdale, Arizona, one of the first groups, and then we had a group in San Diego, a tiny group, like 6 members, and then one in Las Vegas with about 15 members. So I mean, total it was under 30. It was very small, and he didn't want to continue.
And where were you living then?
I was living in Utah. Oh, excuse me, John. I was living in Northern California.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you started the organization, and you're competing with the 800-pound, 900-pound gorilla.
Yeah, for sure.
And so you had differentiators. What did you clearly do different objectively than BNI did?
Number one, we decided to put restrictions on who could become members. And BNI, if you joined, you paid your money, showed up and gave referrals, you could be a member. It didn't matter if you had any experience. You could be your first year on the job. We decided you had to have at least 5 years of experience. And we wanted to have it be more of a mastermind than just a referral group. So it was really I called it a professional relationship networking. So we were about relationships, about knowledge transfer. And once a relationship is built, then of course members take care of themselves. The referrals happen automatically. And so it was just a higher level type of experience for people that had experience. The problem that a business person might have when they get into a BNI group, or let's take an attorney that's got 20 years of experience and they join this group, the attorney can refer everybody they know to a lot of these folks in the group, but they can't refer them back because they don't have the contacts. So professionals got really frustrated being in BNI groups because they couldn't get around like-minded, and associate with people that were like themselves. And so we decided let's take a little higher cut above, make it easy for these professionals to get together and to have a better experience and have better discussions, because they're educated. The other people weren't in BNI groups, so it was a little frustrating. But that seemed to work. It resonated, and we've also had categories that you represented, but ours we didn't have consumer related groups or members so much. Most of ours were B2B.
So would you say that when you talk about members having the same clientele, would it be kind of income based or some similarities that if you have two people that are giving referrals and one is McDonald's, right, and the other is Morton's, there's a different client base. So the
For sure.
McDonald's owner and the Morton's aren't going to have a lot of cross synergy in marketing. So something like that.
Yeah. So yeah, because you have a higher level, educated B2B kind of crowd, we had a few exceptions. We would try to find one of the best realtors in the area because they just knew everybody. So they were good to have in the group, and estate planning attorneys were good, even though they dealt with anyone, not necessarily businesses. They were great, and professionals, and could contribute in the discussions. But yeah, you could take one person and say, listen, my client, whatever your problem is, I can solve it. If you have a need, I can give you I can get you the lawyer, the CPA, whoever you need to take care of your problem. So you come to me every time you have a problem, and I'll get the right person that can take care of you.
How did you charge compared to what BNI charges for its members?
We charged more for the membership. We didn't charge for food because it wasn't a food thing. So we only met monthly. They meet weekly, and they had a food budget. So you might spend $500 a year back then for your membership. You also spent another $300 a year for food because they'd have a big buffet or something every time of breakfast, and it was weekly. So food was a big deal to them. To us, we met early in the morning. They didn't necessarily do that. We met at 7:30 in the morning, and people didn't care about food, even though we did offer refreshments, with light refreshments, and we didn't charge for it. So it was kind of built in. So, the overall amount was probably the same that you spent, but ours was a higher level group and more of a boardroom kind of experience.
So was it just slightly higher or considerably higher fees?
No, I think slightly higher. It wasn't, no, excuse me, for the membership, it's maybe 30% more, but no food budget. So the overall was about the same.
I learned a long time ago, you have to beat your competitor in either price or service. You don't try to beat them in both. You don't need to beat them in both. And if you're providing better service, then you can get more price and be worth it.
Well, John, I remember people, the elite from the community, the professionals from the community, like in Scottsdale or in Vegas or wherever we were at, they'd walk into the room and see these people, and they were professional. A lot of them were in suits. We're sitting around a board table. We were not in a lunchroom. We weren't in a cafe. It was a professional environment. They liked it, and they felt like they were going from their business office to another business meeting. That's what they felt like.
Awesome. And so, how many members did you get up to at your peak?
250, I think, at some point. Yeah, it wasn't huge, but it was, it was a regional kind of organization at the time.
And how many cities were you in?
12. I think we're in 12.
And you sold that.
Yep.
And then when did you decide, subsequent to selling that, or in parallel with that, you decided to write a book? What possessed you to write a book?
Wow. So you think I'm possessed?
Well, I wrote a book and I was possessed.
No, I understand. Well, let me tell you what happened. So I sold Trustegrity. This was in October of 2019. When did COVID happen? COVID became first known, I think, in January of 2020. And so I figured I'm going to take a few months and buy another business. And I was even thinking about starting another networking kind of concept, but I had a non-compete. You know about those. So February came along, it started to sound serious. March, and things started to happen. And I said, okay, I can't start a networking company, and I can't because of non-compete and because it's just not possible to even do events. And I'm just going to take, so at the time I had a granddaughter, a daughter, and a wife who were all writing. And in fact, my granddaughter, she's written 2 books. She's now 19. She was 15 at the time. She wrote that book. And I was so inspired. I said, I've always wanted to write a book. I've just never had the time or never took the time to write it. So I said, how long is COVID going to last? I estimated it to last for 6 months. Well, we were all wrong about that, but I gave myself 6 months. I laid out this this roadmap for my book. I hired a researcher, great editor and writer to help me. And, you know, it took a couple of months to get some kind of a momentum. And then it just started going like clockwork. So I gave it 6 months and within, so I started in, when did I start writing the book? Like in April, I think. And then by, oh, excuse me, John. So I must have started before. I didn't start until a year later. So I fiddled around with some investments. I was a transitional VP with another company. I did some things for about 8 or 10 months, I guess. And then about the next fall, I decided to write a book when I saw what my daughter and my granddaughter were doing. And so I gave myself 6 months. So now it's October 2020, right in the thick of, you know, of COVID, but I didn't think it would last, and I didn't think any of us thought it would. And so I started writing. I got this concept finished, got the book done, and then I had to hire a graphics artist, and then because I wanted to have a lot of good diagrams, and then I started interviewing. I called you. You were my first interview.
Oh, really?
And,
wow.
yeah,
I'm honored. Thank you.
No, I'm honored because you didn't even hesitate. I was so impressed that you just immediately said, you know, I'd like to be in an interview and I'd like to endorse your book. I mean, I just never had anybody just respond so quickly like you did. So I thank you. And so I started those interviews. I got 4 done. And I thought, well, I wanted to have Tom Ziegler be an interview because I knew his dad and he agreed. And then Brian Esposito introduced me to Larry Namer, who started.
Tom Ziegler Zig's son?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Tom Ziegler's he's been the CEO of Ziegler Corporation for like 28 years. His dad made him the CEO before he died. And he's definitely the son. He's very much like his dad, even though he's not like his dad. I mean, if you ask him a question, he can just spill it out without any hesitation. He's amazing. He's like his dad that way. And then Larry Namer was introduced to me, and that was my 6th person and a man to interview. And he was the founder of ET or eTelevision, which is worth billions of dollars today. And then
I was very interested that I thought it was novel that after because you were sending out, as you were writing, you were sending to me to edit what you had written to make sure that you had written it accurately. And then, so at some point you finished apparently with 6 interviews. And then you decided at the last minute that it wasn't diversified enough. So what happened?
Correct. Well, so I had 6 spheres of influence. So I thought the 6 interviews I did with, including you, and they're all men, would be perfect. And then I have all these women in my life. I have 4 daughters, I have a granddaughter, and everybody looking at it said, "Do you have any women in the book?" And when somebody just asked that question, I go, "Oh my goodness, I never even thought about it." It's terrible to not even consider it, because I needed to be diversified, not only because I think you need to these days, but at the same time, I have so many great women in my life. So I immediately thought of a woman named Anu Shukla, who interviewed me 20 years ago for a VP sales job, and I didn't take that job, but we'd stayed in touch. And she's had a remarkable career in the high-tech software space, selling company after company after company. She just sold another one a few months ago for, you know, $400 and something million. Her first one she sold in 18 months. I think it was the company I interviewed for. I should have taken the job. She sold it for $400 million, you know, in 18 months. And she's done that. And when I interviewed her, I said, "I knew that's remarkable." She said, "Well, Gary, that's just one of my many successes." She's Indian. She's amazing. So then I was interviewed. I was introduced by Brian Esposito to a couple of women. So everyone almost, she was the only one that I really knew, the only woman that I decided to interview that I knew. The others were all referred to me. It's using the concepts that I teach in my book. And I wanted everyone to have a good experience. I hope you did. And everyone that I did have a good experience with, that I asked, you know, for referrals, they gave me referrals, and they easily, you know, wanted to be involved.
So what was the goal? What was your goal in writing the book?
You know, I was mentored by Stephen Covey back 35 years ago. I mean, a long time ago. And Covey was the first one to give me the idea that relationships really mattered, and that a win-win perspective and approach was the only way to go into a relationship, even though a lot of people in sales don't think that way. At least I thought at the time. And so I really had a paradigm shift with Covey, excuse me. And so for the next 35 years, I taught those concepts to, almost 2,000 salespeople. And so I wanted to teach. I wanted to take what I knew and what I've been teaching about influence. So I knew it was going to be a book of influence. That part I knew. The strategic part came at the end, where I felt like I needed to distinguish myself, because there are other books out there called Power of Influence. But what I wanted to do is capture my teachings, what I'd been taught, best practices that I had learned along the way, and then to garner information and learning from people like you that could exemplify what I was trying to teach.
Some people on the call may not know what Stephen Covey is most famous for. So what's his number one?
I'll give it to
your favorite.
Well, I mean, his book is called, it's called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's not the first book he wrote, though, I'll tell you. He'd written other books before that. He wrote a lot of books after this 7 Habits, but the first book I ever read, I don't know if you can see the title. There we go.
And now, Spiritual Roots.
Spiritual Roots of Human Relations.
Right.
If you take these two books side by side and you review them, you'll see they're very similar. This has got a very spiritual tone to it. This is very business tone. But a lot of the concepts, even some of the diagrams, are the same. And I read that when I was 19 years old, and it really transformed the way I thought about people and about how you connect with people. And then when he came out with this, I said, oh, wow, he's turned it into this, this temporal type of approach, so the business people can relate to what he used to teach on a spiritual level. And so he was amazing. I had a chance to get to know him very, very well over a 10-year period. I was taught his 7 Habits years before he ever published it in 1989. Way before he knew Oprah, way before he, knew all these great
people.
You're
aging yourself.
I know. But those were good days. If I could go back, I'd do it.
You had 12 extensive interviews, right?
Yes.
That you published. And did you ever vary from those 7 effective habits? Did that just rubber stamp those 7 effective habits, or did you find an 8th effective habit?
Well, I did not want to repeat his book. One thing I did not want to do is plagiarize. I mean, this is a man that means a lot to me. And so I did not want it to be, I did not want someone to read that and say, oh, Gary Laney just updated his book, right?
Right. Not what you wrote, what you learned.
Oh, what I learned. I think that what I learned and what I've extended his book into which is my book today, I think is a different level than what he taught. And because that's why I put strategic in front of it. Because his was something that I think anyone could use. Mine, I think, is similar, but mine is really about leadership. It's really about influence on a strategic level, not just have influence. And that's why I didn't use circles of influence. I decided to use spheres of influence, because a circle is something you can step into and out of very quickly. A sphere is all encompassing. It's 3-dimensional, and you see the relationship from all angles. And that's why I wanted it to be a different kind of a approach.
So if you could say the 3 surprises, any surprises when you wrote the book, if there were any surprises in the dozen interviews, what were they? The top 3 surprises?
Wow, surprises. I mean, I was enlightened. I don't know if I was surprised.
Then 3 enlightenments.
The things I really learned, and starting with you, John, is that everyone had a sense of wanting to help other people. And I didn't know if I got lucky and got 12 people that really cared about other people in their leadership positions, or I just ran in, or just that's a common thread for great leaders. And I think it probably is. I mean, think of the consciousness of what a leader really cares about. If they have good morals and good ethics and good values, they're going to care about the people that they serve, not the other way around. I mean, there's some leaders are out there, they're very pompous, that only care about getting recognition and being told they're the king all the time or queen, but not the 12 of you guys and women. I mean, I was so impressed with the humility. One of the things that Tom Ziegler and I talked about, and he got it from another person, I'll think who that was. It was Ken Blanchard, I think, who wrote The 1 Minute Manager. He said that, leaders are humble and they're confident. And when you first think about those two terms, they seem like they're, exact opposites. But a leader that is, humble and confident means they can relate to people. They don't think they're higher than the rest, and they're confident because they want to achieve things. And so together, you get people that care about each other, that are confident. You can accomplish anything. I thought it was a great concept. But the 12 of you, the 6 women, the 6 men, all delightful, all amazing people that really had a need to, give back. That's why I made that a running theme in my book. That's a different aspect of what Covey talked about. And so, I learned so much. Those are probably the things I was enlightened about.
So, a side point from your career in assessing leaders, CEOs, owners of companies, what percentage of them are humble and giving versus the takers? I mean, what percentage are takers and what percentage are givers?
Yeah, I've had good and bad experiences, from the leaders I've worked under, and I've had some tremendous ones, and I've had some others I wouldn't want to be in the same room with again, right? So, it's interesting to see the people that become the most successful. I think they give up so much, they sacrifice everything for that that highest position. I just don't. I'm not going to name names, but I'd say that the cream of the crop is more like 25%. I'm not going to say it's 75%. I don't think it's the majority. I think it's really a minority.
I agree, for sure it's a minority. The question is what's the size of that minority? But the majority are full of themselves and are taking and that I found in, when I was a kid, when I was in high school and college, I thought the executives at the big companies, back then when I was a kid, it was Ford and General Motors and US Steel, and I thought they were all great people and great and smart. And as I grew up and met them and began to succeed in business, I found that they weren't that good at all. They were unimpressive group. And when people ask me, why have you been successful? And besides being blessed, I say that I always want what's best for each person. I always want and if that's with my company and our company, that's wonderful. But if it's somewhere else, God bless you. I want you to be successful. That's if you do that, if you care about every single person and doing what's best for them, you can't lose.
Well, listen, one of the reasons I follow you is because you care about people and you listen. A lot of leaders don't listen. They will pretend to listen, but then they really want to get back on their schedule and tout themselves and what they've done and what they've accomplished. They forget about the people that helped them get there. And I think that's really critical. I sat next to you in that first dinner that we had in San Jose, and you were all about the people in that group. You weren't there to have us, bestow this title on you. I mean, that's one of the things I teach in the book, is that influence cannot be proclaimed. It has to be bestowed upon you by other people. And they do that because they sense that you're authentic, that you have the genuine approach, that you care about them, and they want to follow you because they're attracted to you. And so then you learn that you're an influencer. Oh wow, they think I'm an influencer. I better stand up to my responsibilities because that's one of the roles of leadership.
Thanks, Gary. We're going to turn it over. Bob Gappa, do you have questions for Gary? And Gary, have you met Bob Gappa over the years?
We've only talked on the phone, Bob, one time.
Good.
Never
Bob,
met.
Questions or comments?
You're muted, Bob.
Thank you. The question I'm going to ask, either one of you could say, well, Bob, didn't you listen to this interview? You should go back and listen to the interview and then you'll know the answer. But under the guise of synopsis, and Cliff Notes. The question is, Gary, what are the keys to getting results through others?
Well, that's a great question, Bob. And I have to kind of rely on my own experience to give you that answer, I think number one, that you have to be part of the team. I mean, you have to roll up your sleeves. You have to be part of the solution, not mandate the solution, not sit behind your desk and say, go solve this and come back to me. You have to get out. You have to make sure that people know that you relate to what they're doing, that you could fill any one of their shoes if you needed to, and that they could relate to you as a coworker, not just a leader. Number two, I think recognition to me is a big deal. I mean, it's one thing to acknowledge, that somebody is participating. It's another thing to thank them for what you see as their participation and their contribution. And as a sales leader back in the day, I used to be big on record breaking of any sort. Whether you did the most calls, whether you had the most closings, whether you had the biggest deal you did, whether you had the best references. We would try to create different records that they could break so that we could show that there's different aspects and dimensions to success, not just the dollar value. So I think if they realize that you recognize who they are as a person, what they contribute, what they can give as a person, and how they contribute to the team, that's a big deal. And I think in the end is realizing that that you're developing relationships, and once you leave this company, what are they going to think about you? I have a lot of people that I follow and other people that follow me, and I've had people follow me from company to company to company. And that says something about the relationship, that we had trust, we had honor between us, and we enjoyed working with each other. And it wasn't just me mandating that I'm your leader, you have to do this stuff. So I think the relationship, that's why in my book, the running theme is, developing relationships that last, relationships that fit, relationships that are strategic, of you and that person. And back to Covey, the win-win side of it. So my answer is kind of a combined answer, but it's all about the relationship and how you recognize the person, how you're part of the solution, and how you become, a team through the process.
Completely. Let me add one quick thing that I would say that if both of us think alike, one of us is useless. So I make that clear to my staff that I'm always looking for input. I'm always looking for them to add value to every situation.
Yeah, it's a great one, John. It's great.
John, when you showed the second book that Covey wrote, was that the book that you were thinking of that was the best book Covey wrote?
It's the most famous. He mentioned Covey, and I just wanted to make sure, because whenever you say that people say to me, "Oh, the 7 Habits of." From my observation, that's what Covey's most famous for. Do you have another?
No. What I also wanted to ask Gary is, I appreciate the people side of all the things that you mentioned, and I love the interview. When you're managing over 400 salespeople, how important is process?
Oh, well, you're getting into another aspect of my life, which is very important, because I'm kind of known for my process management. I mean, I'm very detailed about where I'm going. This book, and in fact, this book that I wrote, The Power of Strategic Influence, I can't just, some people can sit down and write a novel or write a book, and I'm not the kind of person that will ever do that. I have to have structure, I have to have process, and I have to see where it's going. And as Covey teaches, begin with the end in mind. That's one of his 7 habits. So we started a chapter. I had a few ideas, and the first chapter was really rough. And I finally sat down one night. I was up till 3 or 4 in the morning, and mapped out this what I call a table of contents roadmap that included all the main aspects of what I wanted to teach and all the teaching points underneath them. And once I did that, and we had a process, it went like clockwork. And every week we had a new chapter that was coming out. My management style was the same way. When I managed 450 people, salespeople, I had different tiers underneath me, as you can imagine. So I had salespeople, sales manager, I had sales director, so I had like 4 different levels. And so I'd have to think of them as groups. But at the same time, I wanted to relate to every single salesperson as a person, not just a number. So I got a picture of every single one of them back before we had internet. We didn't have internet. It was a lot harder to get a picture of someone. Took a picture of every salesperson, put it on a big wall, and grouped them in groups so I could think of a group and who was in that group. And when I went to a meeting, I could name every single one of them.
Wow.
I don't remember ever missing someone. And I think that meant a lot to the salespeople. When I walk in, I'd see them and I'd shake their hand and and say them, call them by name. That's kind of a big deal.
No question. Thank you, John.
And let's give Zig Ziglar his due. If you're over 50, if you're under 50, you may never have heard of Zig Ziglar. So tell them a little bit about Zig Ziglar.
You want me to ask or Bob?
Yes,
you asking?
you.
Oh, well, Zig. So I first met Zig in 1979, my first year selling, door to door. And this guy is bigger than life. I mean, we had, hundreds of salespeople in this room, at this hotel. And he was so relatable. He was so, just full of energy. And so I'll just tell you a little story, then I'll come back to him. His son, during the interview, I asked him, I said, what was it like to have a dad like Zig Ziglar for a dad? And I said, I don't want to get off you because you're important to my interview, but I said, I would just like to ask that one question. And he said, well, my dad was so inspirational. He just loved his dad. He says, but the thing I learned about my dad more than anything else was his preparation for everything he did. Before he would go, and he spoke, his teachings went to like 30 million people in his lifetime. This guy was probably the greatest all-time motivational speaker to live. And so Tom told me that when he would give a speech, let's say he had a presentation, a 3-hour presentation, usually 3 or 4 hours. And let's say he'd given it 100 times. His dad would still take 2 or 3 days to prepare for that same presentation because it was a different audience.
Yeah.
And he told me that was interesting. He says, at the end of his presentation, he didn't care about the applause. He didn't care about the accolades or the kudos. What he cared about is whether he felt like he represented God in the right way. I thought it was an interesting approach. He wanted to know if God approved what he had spoke about that day. Even though it was a business topic, he was helping people, which God cares about. I thought it was so interesting that he just cared about whether he represented himself properly to all those people. And his son, that just boggled his mind. It just gave him a different perspective as a kid growing up. That's what was important to his dad. So Zig Ziglar, in a 3-hour period, he would take breaks too, by the way. And so I've been in audiences with sales presentations where we bring in the big speakers, and we've had some great ones in the past. But Zig Ziglar didn't leave on the breaks. He would sit down on the stage, get a drink of water, and then he would just get to know all these young people that, didn't have a clue how great this guy was, but he would just relate to them. So anything I can tell you about him was his stories were authentic, his intent was purposeful, and he was just a great man. So I mean, I think that's why people loved him so much, because his stories were real.
How does he compare to Tony Robbins?
I've seen Tony Robbins speak on the internet and other things, and I bought his tapes when he was young. I remember getting the set of tapes that he sold. I think I paid $100, and that was a lot of money for a college kid back then. Zig Ziglar had I'm just going to tell you, because we're in a small group, but I just think he had a much stronger base for God in his life and his values. And Tony's a great guy, but so anyway, that was my perspective.
I had an epiphany a few years ago. I listened to Tony Robbins, and I agree with every single thing he said. Everything. I mean, he was they asked him a question that I would answer that question the same way. Yeah. I mean, I think exactly right. But for some reason, I wasn't totally embraced. And finally, it occurred to me a few years ago, he never mentions God.
Yeah.
He never talked about religion. Yeah. But I've been told, I've mentioned that to a few people that are his disciples since then. And they said he started to, or he does in their weekend retreats or so forth. But and not that he doesn't embrace God, he just doesn't talk about it. And people like you and me and Zig Ziglar, we included in our conversation.
Yeah.
And he's a great guy. He's got to be a great guy. He may be God. Right.
Yep. I think you definitely have a purpose on this earth. I mean, he's influenced hundreds of thousands of people, probably millions of people. And he, he's another one of those bigger than life kind of guys. But yeah, I didn't ever, all the tapes I listened to, I didn't ever hear reference about that. It was all business stuff. He did talk on a personal level to people, but I never listened to him in person, so I can't give a great perspective about Tony.
Last word. Appreciate it. But last word, Gary.
Well, John, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and to follow you and get to know you better. My whole goal, I'm 64, I'll be 65 this year. My whole goal in life now is to just do what I can to help my family, to help other people. I want to be in businesses where I can contribute, where I can help young people that need a head start. And so the money is less important to me than it ever has been in my whole life. But I do want to create things, and I'd like to leave a legacy if that's possible. But I'd like to be something that's positive that will actually move on. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to write a book, is because I thought it'll outlast me for a long time. So thank you for everything. Appreciate your example.
Thank you. Very quick hour, very informative, very impressive. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, guys.
Have a
Thank you,
great
John.
day, everyone.
You too.